This meeting is being recorded.
Do I have to hit OK?
Yeah, it's okay.
Today we're joined by a respected figure in New York basketball, Bobby Gonzalez, a New York native. Coach Gonzalez has dedicated his career to the game as both a leader and mentor. We are excited to have him with us today to share his experiences, his perspective on the game, and his continued connection to basketball here in New York. On April 19th of this year, he will get a well-deserved honor as he is inducted into the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame. What an honor for a great man. We are so thrilled, privileged, honored. You use the word. It's all positive for the man, Bobby Gonzalez, as we welcome him to the NYS Halls of Fame podcast. Welcome, Bobby.
Well, hey, listen, thank you guys for having me. I'm just as honored and thrilled to be on. I don't want to embarrass Rennie, but, Rennie's been a great guy for a lot of years, helping Mr. Garfinkel, Howard Garfinkel from 5 Star, for the people out there that maybe don't know who I'm referring to. I always called him my Jewish godfather, Garf. He's a legend. He was a legend in the game. We all miss him dearly. He passed away some years ago, as Rennie knows, and myself and Rennie went and visited him in the hospital right before he passed away. But anyway, Garf was a big fan of Rennie, and I got to hear about Rennie in the New York State Hall of Fame, being originally from Binghamton, New York, being from upstate New York. I knew it was a well-respected, really well-run, just a great thing, and had heard about, King Rice, who I kind of raised like a little brother. I was the point guard at Binghamton High School before him. He went in a few years ago. So, as you know, a lot about the upstate New York or the New York Hall of Fame, a lot of it is recommendations and guys that have been in before and guys that know each other. And so anyway, I just wanted to really just mention what a great job Rennie does. I know he does baseball and hockey, but with the basketball, with the New York State Hall of Fame, he does a phenomenal job. He's a well-respected guy. And so when I had an opportunity to be part of it, I kept in touch with him for a couple of years, and it's a big thrill for me. My wife and daughter are going to come up with me, of course, for the ceremony, April 19th. My daughter is a freshman right now at Columbia University. And so we're just real excited. It's going to be a great honor. And there's some really big-time people we could talk about as the podcast goes along who are going to go in on that same class that I have different familiarity with through the years in hoops.
Bobby, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We're smack dab in the middle of the greatest sporting event in the year, March Madness. And, it's so exciting on so many levels. And we almost had a giant killer this year. Local college, Siena University, who has been to the dance before, but not in a while, almost took down number 1 ranked Duke. And for any of you who watched, first half, Siena's up to an 11-point lead at halftime. Second half, they maintain their lead. Minutes are ticking down. Siena's in the game with 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. And it looked like it was going to happen. Ultimately, they were like a 5-furlong horse in a 6-furlong race, and they got beat at the wire. They ended up losing by 6. It was really under a minute and 20 when Duke really seized control, but it would have been the biggest upset in the history of this tournament because Siena was a 16 seed taking down 1 seed. Siena was a 27.5-point underdog, and I've been known to bet a game every now and then. And I was going to bet on Siena. I didn't want to jinx them. Bobby, did you watch the game?
100% watched the game. Couple things I could say, a little bit, some more history stuff. GMAC. So, of course, I was the head coach at Manhattan, and I was fortunate enough to go to 2 NCAAs 2 years in a row. We won the MAC. First time we won it was in Pepsi Arena up in Albany. It wasn't against Siena, but it was in Albany. And we beat Fairfield, Timmy O'Toole's team. And we got to the NCAA tournament, and we played Syracuse in the first round, and it was against GMAC and Carmelo Anthony. We played them tough and played them to the wire. We were up 6 with a few minutes to go. They came back. They beat us. they went on to win the national championship. So that's my first experience with GMAC. And then I was the assistant coach with Jay Wright and Jeff Capel from Pitt. Jay Wright, of course, from Villanova fame and 2 national titles. Jay was the head coach, USA Basketball. Jerry McNamara was on the team. He was our point guard. In 2005, we won the World University Games. We won a gold medal together. We spent a month together in Turkey. So I got to coach GMAC then. So anyway, I wrote him a couple notes. I mean, I'm sure he's inundated, obviously, with first getting to the tournament, then the way he played Duke, and now the Syracuse news. So I probably won't hear from the guy for like 6 months. But I did write him and wish him good luck and told him I'd been there. It's doable. It took us was a 2-year run. We didn't do it till the following year when we went back to the NCAA a second time. And then we played Florida in the first round and beat Billy Donovan in Florida and lost to Chris Paul in Wake Forest to get to the Sweet 16, by an eyelash. So that was a special 2-year run, that team. But again, to talk about Siena, what Jerry McNamara did was outstanding, did a great job with his team. Obviously, it's a double-edged sword. When you only play 5 guys 40 minutes, it's a double-edged sword. Some guys try to complain and say, well, his guys were tired. They had no legs at the end of the game. They couldn't make shots. So him playing those guys too many minutes, that's why he lost. On the other hand, what people have to understand is if he doesn't maybe play those guys 40 minutes, maybe they're not in the game with a chance to beat Duke. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 in that scenario when you're playing the Goliath, the big boys. But that's why it's so hard, because they don't have the Sienas. When you play Duke, you don't have a lot of margin for error, whereas Duke is coming off the bench with their 8th man, who is probably McDonald All-American that Siena would kill for, So it's not easy.
Bobby, as you were watching the game, did you think they could win?
I really did. I thought if they could keep it close, as you guys know, what happens with some of the big boys, you get them on a neutral site, the fans start rooting for the underdog, and the favorite starts getting tight down the stretch. And what happens is the favorites start playing not to lose, and the people that are playing with no pressure, the underdogs, start playing to win. And, anything can happen. You throw it up in the air. So I was just praying for them to get, to stay within like 2 to 3 to 4 points getting into the last minute or two. And if they did that, I thought their chances of winning goes up. And, unfortunately, Duke was able to sort of separate a little bit down the stretch. But again, Rennie, I really did think they had a legitimate chance to win that game.
Coach Bobby, first of all, I want to say happy birthday. I know it was a couple days ago, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Also, a couple days ago, Ian Begley, who's a writer on
I lost the call.
He wrote on Twitter or X that you are going into the Hall of Fame, which is a great honor, and you coached some of New York City top high school players at Palatine and Rice High School. Could you tell us who some of those top players were?
Absolutely. It's another irony situation. I coached Adrian Red Autry, who was the coach of Syracuse until GMAC just got hired. So I actually have the honor of being able to say I coached the current Syracuse coach, in high school, and the new Syracuse coach only on a USA basketball team. But I coached Red Autry, who was McDonald All-American. On that same team, we had Brian Reese, who's now with King Rice at Monmouth as a full-time assistant. He played for Dean Smith at North Carolina. They won a national championship. It was Dean Smith's last national title. Brian Reese was a starter on that team. And then there was a player that you guys have all heard of, and unfortunately, he tragically passed away. But Malik Sealy was he ended up St. John's second leading scorer in the history of the school behind Chris Mullin. He got to the NBA. He was coming from Kevin Garnett's, I think it was his birthday party at like 2, 3 in the morning, and a drunk driver crossed over the median and, killed him instantly in Minnesota. But Malik Sealy was a great guy and a great player. So we had 3 McDonald All-Americans. We were actually number 1 in the nation with Bob Mackey in 1988, I believe it was. And I was there until 91 when the school closed. And then I went to Rice High School for 2 years in Harlem and had the honor of coaching Felipe Lopez, who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated before he ever played a college game, because he was almost like it went viral. Like, we didn't have social media in those days, but he was like the LeBron James of his era. So I was able to coach, 4 or 5 McDonald All-Americans during my 5 years in the Catholic League in New York. And that's what Ian Begley is referring to. And of course, that's how I got to know all the college coaches, because they came there to recruit my guys. And then I got to know them. And then, of course, Garf, working the 5-star. So it was a combination of all those things. And then Pete Gillen took a chance on me and hired me at Xavier. But yeah, those were great memories. And it's interesting because a lot of the young people today, they wouldn't even know those players,
So, Bobby, I want to give Len and Jeff a little background on Howard Garfinkel. Garf was really the godfather of basketball in the United States. And he was that because he ran a series of clinics at the 5-star camp where they would bring in the best players from all over the country to try to really train at this camp. And the camp clinicians were Bob Knight, Bobby Gonzalez,
Hubie
Brown, John Calipari, the best in the country.
Rick Pitino started
Rick Pitino. So Garf, started this in the 60s, and Michael Jordan went there.
That's right.
Dwayne Wade went there. LeBron James went there. Moses Malone went there. My friend Mike Fratello, the Czar, used to be a clinician there. So over a long period of time, Garf ran this, an amazing camp for young kids. And Shaquille O'Neal told me once that he couldn't come because he grew up in Texas and his dad was in the Air Force and there was some reg that he couldn't come. Grant Hill was there. Later in his life, Garf was winding down, and so he had asked me to run this clinic for him, set it up, run it, and he gave me his Rolodex. So I have every major college and pro basketball coach's home cell number. And when I would call, they would say, "Who are you? Why are you calling?" And I just say, "Garf." They'd say, "Oh, okay. What do you need? Does he need money? How much? Where do I send him?" They love this guy. And Garf was a never married guy. He lived near the Carnegie Deli. He would eat the same sandwich every day. I don't think he ever paid rent. I don't think he ever paid for a sandwich. Everybody took care of him. He had some financial misfortune at the end, and I was his benefactor the last 3 years. And we ran these clinics upstate, and we had all these coaches come, Billy Donovan, on and on, Jay Wright, Tom Thibodeau, who was one of my favorite guys. And Garf and I used to have these intimate talks, and Garf would always tell me about Bobby and wanted Bobby to do the next clinic before he passed. And as Bobby will tell you, we went to see him at Cedar Sinai in Manhattan, and there were 40 people in a room. Well, the guy was, and we were all holding court. Everyone was laughing and telling stories, and Garf was surrounded by his court, and it was such a fun thing to have these Bobby Gonzalez. So I knew you didn't get to that exalted inner circle unless you were real. So it's really my honor to induct Bobby this year, and Garf will be smiling down from heaven. I went with Garf to his induction at the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame in Kansas City.
Yep.
And oh my God, it was like holding court there. The Red Sea parted for Garf.
Wow.
And we just had so much fun. Garf had just learned to use a cell phone. Just gotten a cell phone. And the only reason he wanted a cell phone was to bet at Aqueduct in Belmont. That was it. And so you talk about a guy who was on that cell phone. It was Garf. But wonderful stories. And
oh, go ahead, Rennie. I'm sorry.
In talking to Bobby, over these last few months, it's really become clear that with Bobby's experience in past as a head coach in Manhattan, coaching in that conference, the MAC conference, coaching Seton Hall. He understands the vibe here at in upstate New York with Siena and New Albany. We have two, real good Division I programs. It's a big market here. There's 4 TV stations, countless radio stations and podcasts. And with GMAC, moving on back to Syracuse, I've got an outpouring of people who would really like to see Bobby get that job. And I just think it's a fit because Bob's experience internationally, what he's done, he stayed in the game. He's a lifer, but he understands today's game. I think he'd be a perfect fit for Siena. Bobby, would you like to be here? Did you like the gym? I mean, what was your vibe when you came up here?
Well, so a few things, Rennie. So first of all, to kind of piggyback off of the thing with Garf first, Rennie mentioned, Garf, I was extremely close with Garf. I mean, so was many other coaches. I would meet him at the Carnegie Deli. Every year when the Street and Smiths magazine came out, we'd break down the teams and the players and again, I drove the van from, the Riverside Church van with all the All-Americans to 5-star in Holmesdale or Pittsburgh. I worked the camp myself for 15 years. I spoke at his clinics and camps. And, like Rennie said, in the end, the last couple of years, Rennie helped him a lot with the coaching clinics that Rennie was doing. And, Garf was like family. My wife still jokes when you make that thing about the cell phone. My wife wanted me to save some of the messages. Garf would call and he would say, Gonzo, you didn't pick up. He thought like my phone was the cell phone was an answering machine. And he'd say, you didn't pick up. He didn't understand that he wasn't talking into a machine. You're talking into a cell phone. So my wife would say, save those messages. They're classic. Garf was a true Damon Runyon character, slick back, black hair, the thick glasses. He kind of looked like a Woody Allen character. And but there was just nobody like Garf. He was one in a million. So Rennie's right. I wanted to at least jump on the Garf thing first, and he was very helpful to me getting hired by Pete Gillen, putting me in Division I. And I would always say, Garf, I never would have become a head coach in the Big East without you. And he would say, no, you were a can't miss kid. You were going to make it. I just hastened the process. Garf never wanted to take any credit. But the last thing I want to mention too with that, where Rennie made a great point about the hospital. Just in his last days, the day that I went, as Rennie said, I missed Rennie by a day. The day I was there, it was a who's who of basketball, just trying to pay their respects. Bob Hurley Sr. was in there. Mike Krzyzewski called on the phone. John Calipari came by. Like, it was just a 20. Tom Konchowski walked in, the scout, it was who's who just in the hospital room saying goodbye to him his last few days before he passed away. But now getting to the modern stuff that Rennie's talking about, listen, I've always had a ton of respect for Siena. I won't, campaign on the podcast for any job, but I will say this, I coached in Manhattan for 7 years. We won 3 regular season titles, 2 tournament titles, a couple holiday festival championships, really had an incredible run. Obviously that's some years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And as Rennie said, I left Seton Hall. I worked in the NBA as a scout. I've done overseas, a lot of international stuff, Europe, Asia. But I do know that the Siena place has always been probably the premier job in the MAC, to be honest. Manhattan had the fact that we were in New York. Iona has always also had the New York thing. So I think Manhattan, Iona, were always considered up there. Fairfield always had nice facilities and money and budget. But Siena was really always the number one job in the league and still is probably today because of the fan base, the beautiful arena, the tradition, the amount of great coaches they've had through the years from, Paul Hewitt, Mike Dean, there's so many guys. Now GMAC joined Fran McCaffrey. So there's a great history at Siena. I know they have a big-time AD that's been there for a lot of years, who knows his stuff. Great school, of course, academically. I worked, of course, at Xavier, which is a Jesuit-run school, Providence, Manhattan. So I've worked at a decent amount of Catholic schools, and I know Siena ranks right up there with them. And the last thing I'll mention is obviously, and Rennie knows this, I love the capital region area. I grew up in Binghamton. We as from when I was a kid, I've been going to Saratoga Racetrack in the summers. Albany is just an awesome area. So certainly the Siena job, I think, offers a lot of intrigue for a lot of guys, like probably young assistant coaches, ex-head coaches like me, maybe some ex-players. I don't know exactly what their formula, what they're going to look for, but I would say it's an attractive job on the market, as Rennie mentioned.
They have gotten thousands and thousands of calls at Siena with people nationally watching that game, kids inquiring, how do I come play at Siena? What do I have to do? That game put them on a map in a huge way.
I believe that, Rennie. I can remember back when we beat Florida in the NCAA tournament. Rich Enzer, the commissioner of the MAC at that time, called me up. He said, Bobby, you don't understand. He said, you just paid the bills for the MAC for the last 10 years by winning that game. He goes, we were in debt. He goes, because, of course, each team, when you win, you get a portion of that money. But the other thing that you made me think of, Rennie, and I know they didn't win it, but they were right there with it, and that is the exposure. I remember they told me the admissions went through the roof after we were in the NCAA. So I can imagine Siena is going to get such a jolt of juice off of this. They're, like you said, Rennie, they're going to get the numbers will go up with admissions. They'll get donors, money. People now want to know, where is it located? What get me some gear? How, it's incredible what what March Madness can do for a mid-major team when they do what GMAC and this team just did.
Bobby, when I put it out there that we were going to have you on the show tonight, someone said to me, well, first of all, they were like, that's incredible. I cannot believe you're going to interview Bobby Gonzalez. This same person went to your basketball camp at Manhattan College.
Wow.
And he said to me, he loved it. He said you really taught the fundamentals and was extremely passionate. And he has been apparently to other basketball camps.
Okay.
And he loved it. So
wow.
He wanted me to make sure that I told you that because he couldn't tell you himself.
That's great. And let me tell you a real quick story you made me think of about that. So I ran the camp, of course, for 7 years in Riverdale. And it was interesting because of where we were located. We used to get like the Mara family and the Tisch family who own the Giants. I know Rennie will know them. And their kids would come to the camp, Mayor Giuliani's son. We would get these limos pulling up and these kids would get out and come into the camp. And I used to say, like, who are these families? Who are these kids? And so Manhattan College, because of where it was located, the northern tip of the Bronx, it was just a really kind of an interesting type camp. I mean, we weren't 5-star, of course, but I kind of stole from Garf, like all the teaching ideas and all the stuff they did at 5-star. And I tried to run it kind of the same way, And one other interesting story happened to me this past summer. Nate Oates, who's at Alabama now, of course, and went to the Final Four about a year or so ago. I didn't know him, and I didn't really, had never met him and didn't really think he would know me. And, I'm much older than him. He stopped me. I was at this tournament. I was scouting for the Pistons, and he goes, hey, Coach, you won't remember this. He goes, but when I was a high school coach in Michigan, he goes, before Bob Hurley Jr. Hired me at University of Buffalo, he goes, I drove 19 hours as a high school coach from Michigan to come up to Manhattan College and work your camp. And he goes, and it was an incredible experience. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, Nate Oates worked my camp. I didn't even know this. Like he's a guy's the head coach at Alabama now. He's like they're talking about him for the North Carolina job. I shouldn't really say that because I guess Hubert Davis is, I don't know what's going to happen there, but there's talk, naming all these names. But anyway, so that was a special camp and a special time. And I'm really thrilled that somebody that actually was there as a player. That's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah. Yeah. He even knew who his counselors were. He remembered. But Bobby, you know more about basketball than I will. I mean, you've forgotten more, as they say, than I'll ever know. Phil Jackson, a few weeks ago, I saw something where he said that the basketball court he felt should be lengthened. He said they should make it like 10 feet longer because it would open up the game more, make it more a running game. So I wanted to know what you think. Do you think that it's at the point where the court could use some adjusting, some lengthening?
Well, listen, that's very interesting. I hadn't heard that. there's so many things. One of the things that I read the other day, when you see a guy like Victor Wembanyama come along, who's almost like a Martian. I mean, this kid is 7'6" with like guard skills. Like they're starting to talk about how, they do need to look at and think about the rules. And one of the things that I hear a lot of guys say, and I kind of agree with this, is so if you go to Europe, they have the 24-second shot clock like everywhere. They use it high school, college, and pro. So they don't have like NBA's 24 seconds, college is 30 seconds, high school might be no shot clock or 45 seconds. And then you have the 3-point line. Now, obviously, the NBA 3-point line is maybe 22-9. It's the longest one. And then there's the girls, and then there's the college one. And I'm not saying they got to make it all uniform because, of course, young kids can't shoot from that far out like in the NBA, so you have to have, I get that part of it. But I think one of the things we got to look at in our game is, should we in college, where we have the 30-second shot clock, should we consider having the 24-second shot clock like the NBA? And then there's the talk of the 3-point line. And then there's talk about something like Phil Jackson just said, which I hadn't thought about that, but that's an interesting point he's making because the athletes are getting bigger, better, stronger, more skilled. I don't know if it's the food. I don't know if it's evolution. I don't know what's happening. But I remember and Rennie could probably attest to this. He's even a little older than me, not to put him out there because I'm getting older. But back when I was younger, I mean, like when Sam Perkins came up to Latham, New York, he was like a 6'10" lefty skilled guy. You never saw guys like that in those days. He was like rare. Nowadays, like you have like kids coming out 6'10", like KD, like guys, there's so many more big kids that can handle the ball, pass the ball, shoot the ball. Obviously, it's a global game, the international influence. Somebody had the other day, 5 of the top players in the NBA are Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's, of course, an African kid, but he grew up in Greece. You have Luka Doncic from Slovenia. You have Jokic, who's from Serbia. He got back-to-back MVPs. You have Victor Wembanyama, who I just mentioned, who came from France. Like the way the game has just exploded, and now with the size and skill level of these guys, I do think it's a very good point and probably needs to be studied and talked about. What are the future things that the game really needs to think about? Because a guy like Phil Jackson, who's got 11 rings and has coached, the greatest players that ever lived, like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, who am I to say he doesn't know what he's talking about? You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's a very interesting point. That's one that I had never heard. I've heard people talk about the rim being 10 feet from the floor, the foul line 15 feet. Like I've heard a lot of other type of things, But I do think that the spacing in the game is something that's talked about a lot. They try to talk about how they can, open up the game and because guys are just getting so much bigger. And the last thing I'll mention on that note is when you see college, certainly there's big guys and there's great players and all of that. When you go to the NBA level, I tell you, it's amazing. Even me, I've been coaching for 30, 40 years. When I was scouting for the Pistons and I actually sat down courtside and I got to see a couple NBA games up close, and you see the size difference of these guys. When you have like 8 to 10 guys on the floor, nobody is under 6'6". There's like 6'7" wings, 6'5" point guards, 7'4" men and 5 men. And these guys are like dinosaurs. I mean, they're just rare. Like they're just like you're looking out there and you're saying, man, Anthony Davis, some of these guys, like it's amazing. And then the court almost looks small when you're watching the NBA guys up close. Now, you may not notice that when you see high school or even college, especially like D2, D3. But when you get to the highest level of D1, you start looking and saying, wow, some of these guys are really big. When you get to the NBA, it hits you the actual physical difference of the guys in the league and what separates guys that make it and guys that don't. And a big part of it is the size and the physical. They call it, when you scout in the NBA, they call it positional size. Like what size are you for your position? And point guards, you'll have some tiny Archibalds, some Chris Pauls. You'll have some 6-foot guys here and there, but not like back in the day. Nowadays, it's, there's not that many guys under 6'3" that make the league anymore, So it's pretty incredible. That's an interesting point you bring up.
We had Phil Jackson coaching the Albany Patroons before he took
Yes.
the job with the Chicago Bulls. And Phil's assistant coach was a guy named Charlie Rosen. And Charlie Rosen wrote 12 books on basketball. He was the funniest guy I ever talked to. We inducted Charlie a few years ago. He just passed away this last year. Len Jeff, the funniest guy in basketball you've ever heard. Rosen told the best stories. And I think when they were coaching the Albany Patroons, they were 61-5.
Wow.
I've heard of Charlie Rosen, and I never met him. I don't know him, but I actually talked to him on the phone a couple of times, Rennie, because a few people put me in touch with him when Phil Jackson was with the Knicks. I remember we were all trying to figure a way I was trying to figure out a way to get in with the Knicks as a coach, as a scout, whatever, because I lived 10 minutes from the practice facility there in Westchester, and somebody had put me on the phone with Charlie Rosen to see if we could get Charlie Rosen to help me with Phil Jackson. But again, it was so hard. It's so brutal. It's so political. There was so many guys, of course, ex-players and guys hitting them for jobs that, who knows. But there was talk that Charlie Rosen almost was going to join him, but I guess he never did. He kind of stayed in the background, I guess.
Bobby, I'm an alumnus of St. John's University, and I went there
Okay.
at the heyday of Chris Mullin, Bill Wennington, Mark Jackson, with Lou Carnesecca as the coach. You know everybody in the game. Do you have any stories about Lou Carnesecca? Because he was just a great, great guy.
Oh, Lou Carnesecca was incredible. I absolutely do. First of all, when I was the coach of Talentine and Rice during those 5 years in the Catholic League I mentioned earlier, I worked his camp. He ran a camp in Sydney, New York. It was Golden Valley back in the day. Jerry Marabido and them, the family owned it and ran it. But Carnesecca would have a New York Catholic League camp up there in Sydney, which is only 40 minutes outside my original hometown, outside of Binghamton. And I would work it every year. I worked Coach Carnesecca's camp for years, and he had a legendary guy you might have heard of. He also passed away before Coach Carnesecca did, named Red Sarachek. And Red Sarachek was one of Louis' mentors and one of these guys, kind of like a Tex Winter type guy that, was around the game for 60 years, was a legend. So Lou would go up there with Red Sarachek, and they would sit around at night and tell stories and X and O. But here's where really a great story. When I was at Talentine and Coach Carnesecca came in to recruit Adrian Autry, who ended up going to Syracuse, I never forget when Coach Carnesecca came into the office, he sits down and he takes the chair. Now, we had seen, Dean Smith had come in for Brian Reese. Bobby Cremins came in for Brian Reese. We had everybody coming in for Red Autry, Louisville, Denny Crum, all these big-time guys. So we went through about 2 weeks' worth of home visits. Well, I'll never forget, Coach Carnesecca come in, and he does something so different than anyone else. He first of all takes the chair, and he moves it up to about 6 inches away from Red's face. He's literally like sitting in his lap. And he says, Adrian, and he's got that low voice, and he says, listen, you're a New York kid. You're family. You're home. This is home. He pulls out this ring. He starts showing him back in the day from when he coached the Nets and he coached St. John's. And he starts talking about New York and why, he starts talking about Walter Berry and Chris Mullin and going to the Final Four and why Red Autry needs to stay home. And the guy was amazing. He could talk. He was speaking in Spanish, Italian. He probably knew about 5 languages. And he was mesmerizing. And, there was nobody like him. And then the last story I have is I went to when he retired. They had a retirement dinner in the Hilton Hotel in New York City in the 50s, I remember. And I'll never forget his line. He got up and he said, listen, a lot of people are asking me why I'm retiring now. He said, all I cared about was having more friends than I have enemies and more wins than I have losses. And he said, so I'm ready to go. But I never forgot that line. I wrote it down. And he just was, there was nobody like him. These days, Rick Pitino has been talking about him a lot, of course, because Rick has St. John's back in the Sweet 16. And Louis is just loved. And, there's things named after him, the Carnesecca Court where they play. And he was a true legend of the game, just a legend. Icon, basically.
Len?
We actually inducted Louis right before he passed, but he wasn't able to travel. So we actually went down to his home and inducted him in his home. And he said, before you come, will you stop at the bakery and get me some cannolis? So we brought him a lot of Italian pastries. Oh, he was wonderful.
Well,
Great guy.
this is another thing you made me think of. I remember we went to dinner with him once at an Italian restaurant, and it was called Dante's. And Louis would always go there after every game. They said after every home game, and he would turn the bread a certain way. We said, "Coach, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm very superstitious. If the bread isn't facing this direction, we may not win." You know, he was just he was a unique guy.
Bobby, when my feeling is as far as coaching, basketball and football to me, and hockey also, but and basketball really specifically because you're drawing up the plays. I always feel that the basketball coach has the most control of the game, the most influence on the game. What's your feelings on that? Do you agree with that?
I think that's probably true. It seems like in football and baseball, certainly they're involved. Of course, they make important decisions. I certainly wouldn't downplay that. But with football, you have so many guys, and then you have different, defensive coach, offensive, director. In other words, there's the head coach who's managing. It's a little different, like you say. He's in charge of like 70 people or whatever. Baseball, he's managing, and in coaching basketball, you do have a staff, of course. You have assistant coaches. Of course, the referees have major influence. So I'm not going to say that, there isn't other things out there. But I do think you make a very good point that the head coach in basketball has a real direct sort of effect, on the game. And really, I'm not saying you could determine outcome, of course. I mean, like anybody else, you could have injuries. Guys don't make shots. The game, the ball goes up, and people have to handle pressure, and all kinds of things happen. And coaches, can't control some of it. But I do think you make a very good point that basketball coaches have a lot of, kind of control and say, and there's been talk. I remember having the same conversation with Garf, as Rennie said, you would sit around and talk with intimate stories with Garf. And I remember him saying, like, the reason guys like Bobby Knight were so great because he felt like guys like Bobby Knight were almost like a general in the Army where they could put their will on the game. And there is some coaches that are that way. They're so commanding, and they have such a presence, and they have such a personality, or I don't know if it's a charisma thing but like, like Coach K, I thought Coach K had it, at Duke. Like he was just one of those guys that, man, to me, like he could put like his will on the game, so to speak. I mean, again, you can't press buttons and of course, there's the basketball gods, sometimes the ball goes in, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's a very good point and very good question you're asking. And I do think basketball coaches, which is probably why they get fired, they get hired, they're revered, they make a lot of money. There's a lot of good and bad with that, I guess. That kind of power.
Can St. John's beat Duke?
I tell you, Rennie, and I'll probably end up being wrong. I kept thinking that St. John's, I didn't love their guard play. I kept thinking they couldn't make enough threes to get to the Elite Eight or this far. I had them winning in the first round. I didn't even think they would beat Kansas. I thought it'd be close, but I thought Kansas would win. Now they proved me wrong. They've made 10 threes in the first two games. Now they're playing Duke, and I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say I really think Duke is a better team, and I worry with Pitino's team that they don't have enough great guard play. Even though Darling makes a shot at the buzzer, they have good guards. Ian Jackson, I'm not saying they don't have talent, and the kid Sanin can shoot. Sanin, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but they have good talent in the backcourt. They got a very good inside game with Mitchell and Zuby Ejiofor and Bryce Hopkins. So I love their 3, 4, and 5. I looked at them and I said, I don't think they got great guards. I really believe you have to have great guard play to get to a Final Four, to win a national title. And then I didn't think they shot it well enough from 3. So I'm going to sit here, Rennie, and I'm going to say, I think Duke wins the game. But you know what? Rick Pitino is a brilliant coach, and he found a way to beat Kansas, and I didn't think he would. So I guess it wouldn't totally shock me if they somehow find a way to beat Duke. But if I was a betting man, and I can't bet games because of the coaching side of it, I would pick Duke. But, it's tough to pick against this guy.
Bobby, you know all about basketball, obviously. The international game, could you tell us how that has changed basketball from what 30, 40 years ago?
Well, I think there's always been a lot of talk about when David Stern and they took that first dream team and they talk about how that globalized the game because Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, all Charles Barkley, they all went overseas and they started playing in the Olympics and they won the gold medal and they were so fascinating with that first dream team that everyone says that you can literally draw a direct parallel back to then when kids were growing up in Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and they saw the dream team guys, and they said, "Man, that's what I want to do. I want to be like that." And the coaching went up, and the talent went up, and the teaching of the game, got expanded, and they started bringing U.S. coaches overseas to do clinics, and and it just sort of changed it's like the internet, it made the world smaller. And I think that what's happened now is they've caught up to us a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying, we still usually, if we put the best guys together and we put our NBA guys together, we usually still win the Olympic gold. So I think we're still the best at it, got the best athletes and all that. But it's not like it used to be. It's no walk in the park, as you know. There's teams now, France, these different teams come along. They got NBA guys, they got great shooters. And I think the other thing that overseas has kind of taught us and showed us is, and a lot of coaches will steal from the style of play over there because they started using the three-point line way before us. They started spreading the floor, running different kinds of offenses. The FIBA game it's a different style game than the NBA game. And then the other part of it is a lot of in overseas, they have a different system with how the youth, the way that, like, not knocking AAU. I'm not going to say, like, a lot of people try to blame AAU in this country for some of they'll say, oh, we just play AAU and kids travel and they have a sense of entitlement and they play all over the place and they don't work on their game. They don't develop. And it's just, a lot of people try to knock AAU and I don't want to do that. But I think what has happened overseas is when I've gone over there and I've coached and I've done clinics and I've seen, they have these, like, a different system. They have these academies where literally they grab kids when they're young and they still go to school, but they're literally practicing and watching film and working on ball handling and shooting and skill work. And they start them at a younger age and they're starting to develop players that you notice a lot of the big guys like Jokic who can handle, pass, and shoot the ball. That is a big European thing. All the European players are usually able to do those three things. They can handle it, they can pass it, and they can shoot it. And they start that at a young age. And we sort of train and develop the game a little different here. Now, we're faster, we're more up-tempo, we're more athletic. We got the high-flying dunks and jumping and running. And we have some athletes like a guy like LeBron James. Like, you never see a guy like that coming from, or rarely do you see a guy like LeBron James coming from, different parts of the world, or Michael Jordan. Those guys are just, kind of just like freaks of nature, and you don't see a lot of guys like that coming internationally. But the way they teach the game, the way they develop the game has really impacted and affected, I think, the development of some of the players that are coming from there now. And I think that's one of the reasons why everybody here is saying, hey, we have to look at how we're training our youth and what's happening with the game in the U.S. and why are other countries, developing guys and catching up to us? And why is there so many international players now in the NBA? I think I heard or read that there's 15 guys in each roster. There's 30 teams, and I think that gives you about approximately, mathematically 450 players. And I think out of those 450 players, about 100 of them are from 38 different countries in the world. So, you're talking a big percentage of the NBA now is global, is international.
Bobby, when it comes to
my
offense,
favorite international player of all time played for the New York Nets, Jersey Nets. His name was Drazen Petrovic. He played with Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson. Did you ever see them?
He was fantastic. I know of him. I know about him. I saw some films on him. One of the greatest shooters in the history of the game. I think I understand, Rennie, if I'm not mistaken, he maybe got killed in a car accident or something like that. It was tragic.
He did.
Yeah,
yes.
in Munich, yeah.
Well, another interesting thing.
They had a really...
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Rennie.
Bobby, I was going to ask you, give me your 3 favorite basketball movies of all time.
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Man, well, when I was a kid, I loved the fish that saved Pittsburgh with Julius Erving, but that's way back. But you gotta love Blue Chips because of Nick Nolte, and they had Penny Hardaway and Shaq and all the Boeheim and Patino, and then and Tark, Coach Tark from UNLV. They make a casual appearance about recruiting. So I thought Blue Chips was very good, and then and of course Hoosiers.
Right.
You can't go top three without Hoosiers and Gene Hackman and the Indiana story, So that probably those three, but I'm probably missing a few good ones too, I'm sure.
How many times have you seen Hoosiers, Bobby?
Oh man, I must have seen it, 10, 15 times. And you know what's great too, Rennie? when I worked with Pete Gillen at Xavier, and you probably know this today, because they're in the Big East now, the arena that Butler plays in, Hinkle Fieldhouse, that's where they filmed Hoosiers. And I got to coach in there with Pete Gillen at Xavier, and it was such a thrill. I was walking around looking at the building, and so that building there where Butler Bulldogs play in the Big East, that's Hinkle Fieldhouse. That's where they filmed the movie. So it's a great venue.
Bobby, you hear all the time, with basketball that offense is something that someone has, they can improve upon it, but defense, it's all effort. And if you hustle and you can, defense you could get better at. But aren't there players that, and I don't know this, I want to know your opinion. They hustle, they work hard, but there are some just like there are some natural offensive players. Are there some natural defensive players who just defense comes naturally to them?
Yeah, I believe that. I think you're right. I think that a lot of playing defense is a mental mindset. And, some guys are the type that are going to run through a brick wall. And well, here's how I'll say it. I'll never forget, I think it was Rick Barnes, or it might have been him, or I can't remember which coach it was, but he made a great point one day. I'm listening at a coaching clinic like Rennie used to have, and the coach said, listen, playing hard is a learned skill. And I had to think about that for a second. He said, playing hard is like learning how to dribble, pass, and shoot. And he said, all these kids, when you ask them at a camp, if they play hard, they all raise their hand and they all say that they know how to play hard. But what really the truth is that kids kind of have to be taught how to play hard. And that's the same thing with defense. It's like there's a certain amount of teaching that goes into playing defense, but a lot of it is the mental mindset and the makeup. And there's certain guys that just, they have a great motor, or they're athletic, they have certain quickness or toughness about them, or strength, or they just have certain attributes that, come out on the defensive side of the ball. And then if you put in the fact that some kids will go out on the court and they play lights out, and you don't have to sort of motivate them. They just do. They just, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's their parents or their upbringing, or they just go out there and they play hard as heck. And then you see some kids that go out there and, they're not necessarily lazy, but they're the type of guys that, you gotta hug them, or you gotta kick them in the butt, or you gotta pull them aside and say, hey, man, you gotta play harder, So it's a funny thing how personalities affect, coaching, and how you have to learn, the difference between this guy and that guy and what it takes to press buttons and motivate them. But defense is a big part of that. I think it's something that everyone can do if they want to, but there is a lot of truth about that you have to have it in your heart. You have to want to do it. It takes effort. It's not fun. The offense is kind of the more exciting, fun part. Coaches always say offense sells tickets and defense wins games, or offense, brings fans and defense wins championship. There's all these different sayings comparing the difference between offense. Offense is the fancy, fun, exciting part, and defense is like the blue collar, dirty work, no one wants to do it type of thing, because it's tough. It's hard.
Bobby,
from Schenectady, New York, is our very own Pat Riley.
Oh,
did you ever meet Pat? Did you go see him when he coached the Knicks?
I met him a couple of times. I actually was with Pete Gillen. We were, funny story, we're stuck in Utah. We were out there recruiting. The Lakers were in town to play the Utah Jazz. We were in the same hotel as them. We got snowed in. We couldn't leave. We had to stay there for 2 days. Pat Riley, we met him in the lobby. He was fantastic to us. He let us come watch them practice. He got us tickets. We went to a game. He was amazing. And then I saw him years later when we beat Florida in the NCAA. I saw him at the Kentucky Derby, and he recognized, he knew I was the coach of Manhattan, and he said, "Hey," and we started talking. I couldn't believe that he remembered me. That guy is unbelievable, Rennie. One of my all-time idols. Probably the coolest guy that ever coached, with the suits and the slick back hair. Nobody like Pat Riley. I mean, just one of my idols. And it's amazing that he came from upstate New York. I'm very proud of it. I tell everybody, man, Pat Riley's from up in the Albany area. And I heard a funny story, Rennie, that one time my buddy said they were leaving Saratoga and they pulled into this gas station, and they said this real cool looking guy pulled in with a convertible Mercedes-Benz, got out, had the Armani suit with the hair slicked back and sunglasses. They said, sure enough, it was Pat Riley. And they were like mesmerized. They were like, that's the coolest dude that ever lived right there, And they'd seen him like in the Albany area. And I said, man, I wish that was me, he's one of the guys running to this day. If I ever see him again, I'm going to try to get a picture with him because I got to get a picture with Pat Riley before I leave or he passes away or I pass away. Or that's one of my life goals. If I see him again, I didn't think of it in those days. When I met him, I didn't think like, hey, I got to get a picture of Pat Riley. Now I'm older and I'm like, man, I wish I got a picture of Pat Riley.
Bobby, we really thank you for your time. We really enjoyed it. I got one more question for you.
Okay.
Being here on Long Island, Len and I on Long Island, Hofstra went to the NCAA tournament. How what's your opinion of college basketball here on Long Island? Hofstra, Stony Brook, those teams.
Well, I'll say it like this. When I was at Manhattan and me and Jay Wright became good friends, because Rennie knows this, I would use him as a reference nowadays because me and Jay, I was Jay's assistant. We won a gold medal with Jerry McNamara in Turkey, and me and Jay were roommates for like a month. He came to my wedding. Jay was at Hofstra. When I was at Manhattan, we started a 4-year series. And when he left to go to Villanova, I kept it going with Tom Pecora at the time. And good basketball out there. Great players come from Long Island. Of course, Rennie knows he had Terrell Harris a couple of years ago in the Hall of Fame. His son is Tobias Harris. You have Danny Green going in this year, who's a Long Island guy. So I think Long Island, great coaches through the years. Jeff Ruland, Dale Skinner, Paul Hewitt, many guys from Long Island. Great players through the years from Julius Erving on up to the current day, modern day. And then, of course, Hofstra, the job that Speedy Claxton has done, former player, from Hofstra, who took his team, his alma mater to the NCAA tournament. He beat my buddy King Rice in the finals of the CAA, which I got to be honest, I was rooting for Monmouth. But, hey, Speedy Claxton's done a great job. I don't know as much about Stony Brook, but I know they're Division I. I know they're supposedly doing a good job. So I know that Long Island has always been another basketball, a great basketball place. Matter of fact, the last thing I'll mention is Mitch Kupchak, another big name from out in Long Island. I remember when he was a GM of Charlotte, I saw him somewhere and he thanked me for the job I did with John Garcia, who was from his high school, Brentwood High School. I had him at Seton Hall. He was a big Dominican kid and I got him in shape and he turned out pretty good. And Mitch told me, he said, Bobby, you did a really good job with him. He said, I was close with John's father. I helped that kid. He's from my high school. So again, another big Long Island name, but nothing but love and respect to Long Island basketball.
Bobby,
did you ever meet Jimmy Valvano when he was coaching Iona?
I only got to meet him a very short amount of time, Rennie. I shared an elevator with 5 or 6 coaches when he was speaking at a clinic. We all went to see him speak. It was in Westchester. I can't really say he would even know before he passed away, even knew who I was. But we were in the elevator, and I'll never forget, he was telling jokes, and we shook his hand, and we went and watched him speak, and he was amazing. And he's another guy I wish I would have thought of it in those days, Rennie, and took a picture with him or something.
Bobby,
I wonder if he ever did the Garf camps. Did he ever do the Garf clinics?
He may have, Rennie, because he's another guy that was around in those days with Coach Patino, Coach Krzyzewski, Bobby Knight, all the guys you mentioned, Rennie, that worked the camp. He may have come from that same, crew that during those same days.
Garf told me that the very first year he had his clinic, they only had maybe 40 kids signed up, and Garf was lamenting, we may not have enough people to make this work. And he said it was the week of the clinic, and in walks Hubie Brown. Hubie Brown said, I've got 100 kids signed up. So all of a sudden, from one night to the next, his clinic became huge because of Hubie Brown.
Well, that's what, we used to joke with Garf, and we used to say, Garf, Pete Gillen used to always say, Garf, I know you have an order, and Coach K is right up there, and Coach Petito, and it's, he's number 2, and this guy's number 5, and Pete used to say I'm way down the list, and Garf used to say, Gonzo, you were way down the list, and then I told you to pick me up in the golf cart. That means you moved up a lot of spots. That was like a special job to pick up Garf in his dorm room in the morning. But what I was going to say was Hubie Brown was always at the top of the list, and we used to say that Garf thought Hubie Brown was like God. He said with Garf it's God and then Hubie Brown. So now I understand why, Rennie. He probably got the camp off the ground, and Garf would have never survived 30, 40 years without Hubie.
Bobby, on April 19th, it's less than a month away, you're going to be called to go up to the podium to give a speech, as I said, for a very well-deserved honor, to be inducted into the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame. Knowing what you know about that Hall of Fame, when you go up there, will you be a little nervous when you're giving that speech? What are the feelings that are going to go through you? Because I've seen people go up there and give speeches, and I've talked to people before they go up, and the excitement and the nerves. What's it going to be like for Bobby Gonzalez?
I do think it'll be a little nerves. As much as I've been, I've publicly spoke, and I went in the Binghamton Hall of Fame 2 years ago, as Rennie knows, my hometown, myself and King Rice. And I'm waiting. Supposedly next year, I'm supposed to be involved with Manhattan College and maybe New York City or Bronx, a few other ones. But let me tell you something. The New York State one is going to be special because I'm an upstate kid originally. It's going to be emotional. My wife and daughter are coming up. Again, Pat Riley was my idol. I've become very good friends with Rennie. I love the area. Coached again. Got to the first NCAA playing against in Sienna's building. It's definitely going to be emotional. It's going to mean a lot. I'll probably definitely be a little nervous. I'm going back and forth. I got this one story in my head, but I'll tell it now because maybe I'll get it out of the way on the podcast, and then my wife won't be mad at me and then it'll get me. I won't tell it at the night of the thing. But there's a funny story when the last time Rennie will get a kick out of this, but 15 years ago when the Sienna job opened up, when Tom Healy was still alive, big PC guy who was a big Albany guy. And Tom calls me up, and a lot of people wanted me to become the Sienna coach then. And it was before I went to Manhattan, of course. And all of a sudden, me and my buddies, again, we grew up going to Saratoga Racetrack. So I get a phone call, and they said, Bobby, you're not going to believe this. I said, what happened? They said, well, there was a radio show, and they were taking calls, and they were talking to the top media people in Albany, and everyone was calling in and suggesting who they thought should get the job. They were giving names. They were talking about, Quinn Snyder, Matt Doherty, and all these different names. And they said all of a sudden this girl called in and she said, hey, I'd like to recommend the coach Bobby Gonzalez. And the guy said, well, that's a great choice. A great recruiter. He helped Providence get to the Elite Eight. How do you know him? That's a heck of a, that's a good name. And she goes, well, I don't know what kind of coach he is. I don't know if he's any good at recruiting. She said, but I can tell you this much. He was a great kisser. So I got all these calls from the media up in Sienna saying, hey, you got a reputation of. I said, for what? They said, you must have been a great kisser. You must have met a girl up in Albany. I said, what? I never heard that before. So I thought about telling that story the night I get the award, but then I thought maybe I better not. My wife and daughter are there. Maybe I better talk. I said that might be one I could use on the podcast and get it out of the way.
Probably not advisable to use on your Hall of Fame speech.
There you go, Rennie. That's why I wanted to get it out of the way today. I figured this is a little more for being loose but listen, really, in all seriousness, it'll be an emotional night. You never take something like this lightly. This is not something that happens every day. And I'm honored. Like I said, I'm going to probably thank Rennie 5 times because there's a million guys out there. Rennie knows a ton of people. There's a lot of choices. Who am I to be any different? Like there's so many guys, Rennie could pick or people could. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
So I have to finish with one story before we go.
Okay.
When we inducted Garf into this Hall of Fame, he was thrilled and he was honored, but he didn't really know a lot about, Schenectady or Albany or Saratoga.
Right.
And so I said to Garf, I want to tell you in advance that we're going to give you the Barry Kramer Lifetime Achievement Award. Right. So Garf all of a sudden, speechless. And he goes, not the NYU Barry Kramer. I said, yeah, same guy. He goes, is he still alive? I said, oh, yeah. He's a New York State Supreme Court judge.
Wow.
And he goes, oh, my God, can I meet him? Can I sit at his table?
How about
And
that?
so Garf was in all his element because he got to meet and sit with Barry Kramer,
Wow.
who at the time in the mid-'60s, NYU was a Division I program, and the star was a 6'5", Cary Grant, handsome Jewish guy, Barry Kramer.
Yes.
It was before ESPN, and he was the rock star, second leading scorer in the country. I used to go to Judge Kramer's judicial chambers, and when I would get there, he would come out, greet me like I was his son, and say to the secretary, "This is a very important meeting. Hold all my calls. Don't bother me while Rennie's here." I go into his judicial chambers, and you'd expect to see law books, and he's got his Knicks jersey, he's got his NYU jersey, signed basketballs, programs, and he just loved talking hoop.
Oh, I could
amazing
imagine.
Guy.
That's a great story, Rennie, and that I could see Garf was it. That's wonderful to hear. I'm happy to hear that. I know of Barry Kramer. Ken, he was before me, but I know he was a legend. But that is a great story, man, and that's a great one to hear. And I'll tell you guys, if I did a decent job tonight on this podcast, I hope somebody taped it or filmed it. Please hold on to it. Send me a copy or keep a copy, and I could always tell my friends they can listen to the part about that the story I told that I can't tell the night of the dinner.
You got it. Bobby, thank you so much for being on.
Bobby, thank you so much. It was a real honor to have you on.
Thank you, Bobby.
Rennie, it was my honor, and it'll be even more my honor when, April 19th. So thank you guys.
Super.